Welcome to Behind the Norm. For thousands of years, humans have stood apart from every other creature on this planet for one primary, visual reason: we cover our skin. Today, we treat a simple cotton shirt or a pair of leather boots as a basic necessity, an afterthought of daily life. But have you ever paused to wonder why we started this journey? Why did a species that evolved in the warmth of the African sun suddenly decide to wrap itself in the furs of the beasts it hunted? The story of clothing is not just about fashion or modesty. It is a story of survival, of migration, and a technological leap that allowed us to conquer the entire globe. In this documentary, we will trace the needle's path from the frozen tundras of the Ice Age to the royal courts of the ancient world. We will look at how the first stitches were not made for beauty, but as a desperate tool against extinction. Many believe that our ancestors began wearing clothes as soon as they lost their thick body hair, but the reality is far more complex and surprising. It involves microscopic evidence, ancient bone tools, and a shift in human psychology that changed our species forever. We will explore how the invention of the eye needle changed the course of human history in ways that even the wheel could not. But before we dive into the physical tools, we must understand the when and the where. How do scientists track something as fragile as ancient fabric that rotted away thousands of years ago? The answer lies in a very unexpected place: the evolution of a tiny parasite. We are going to examine the fascinating and slightly strange biological clues that tell us exactly when the first wardrobe was created. As we will see in the coming sections, this biological clock gives us a precise window into a time when humans were forced to innovate or die. So, let us travel back to a time over 70,000 years ago, to a world that was becoming increasingly cold and unforgiving. Who was the first? To understand the origins of clothing, we must look for clues that aren't made of stone or bone. Because fabric and animal skins decay quickly, archaeologists faced a massive mystery: when did we truly start covering up? The answer came from an unlikely source: the evolution of lice. Scientific studies conducted at the University of Florida around the year 2011 provided a breakthrough. By studying the DNA of body lice, which only live in clothing, researchers determined that these parasites diverged from head lice approximately 170,000 years ago. This date is crucial because it tells us that humans were wearing some form of clothing long before we even left Africa. It wasn't just about the cold of the north, it was a fundamental shift in how we interacted with our environment. Around 100,000 years ago, during the Middle Stone Age, we find the first evidence of humans using ochre, a red clay pigment, to treat animal skins. This wasn't just for color. It served as a preservative to stop the hide from rotting. Think about the technical challenge our ancestors faced. Imagine trying to clean a thick animal hide using only a sharp rock. In the caves of South Africa, such as Sabuta Cave, researchers discovered bone tools dating back 75,000 years that were specifically designed for leatherwork. These early tailors were learning how to turn a stiff, organic material into a soft, wearable second skin. They were the world's first material engineers, experimenting with durability and flexibility. But leather was just the beginning. The real revolution happened when we stopped just draping and started shaping. As we will discuss in the next chapter, the transition from simple wraps to fitted garments required an invention so small, yet so powerful, that it rivaled the discovery of fire. We are talking about the birth of the needle, a tool that allowed us to stitch our survival together. The transition from wrapping a loose hide around the body to creating a fitted garment was a turning point in human evolution. For a long time, early humans simply tied skins together with sinew or vines. But as our ancestors moved into the freezing landscapes of Siberia and Europe, loose was no longer good enough. To survive temperatures that dropped to -40 degrees, clothing had to be airtight. This necessity birthed one of the most important inventions in history, the eyed needle. The oldest known bone needles with eyes date back approximately 50,000 years and were discovered in the Denisova cave in Siberia. Think about the craftsmanship required for this. A master craftsman had to take a bird bone or a mammoth tusk, shave it down to a thin point, and then, most impressively, drill a tiny, perfect hole through one end without shattering the material. This was the high-tech of the Stone Age. These needles allowed humans to sew multiple layers of fur together, creating the first parkas, trousers, and boots. But what were they sewing with? Before the invention of processed thread, they used sinew, the tough fibrous tissue that connects animal muscles to bones. When dried and shredded, sinew becomes incredibly strong and flexible. They also used catgut, or thin strips of leather. In places like the Dzudzwana cave in Georgia, archaeologists found flax fibers that were dyed in various colors like pink, black, and blue, dating back 34,000 years. This proves that even in the depths of the Paleolithic era, humans weren't just thinking about warmth, they were thinking about aesthetics and identity. The ability to create fitted clothing changed where we could live. Without the needle, the conquest of the Arctic and the eventual migration into North America across the Bering Land Bridge would have been impossible. We were no longer limited by our biological skin, we had engineered a portable environment. However, clothing soon became more than just a shield against the wind. As we will explore in the next section, as societies grew, what you wore began to tell a story about who you were, leading to the birth of social status and the first uniforms of the ancient world. As the Great Ice Age ended and the climate stabilized, a new revolution began, the birth of textiles. Around 10,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, humans made a radical transition from hunting animals for their skins to farming plants and animals for their fibers. This was the era of the Neolithic Revolution. In ancient Sumer and Egypt, the invention of the loom changed everything. Instead of wearing a heavy hide, humans could now weave a fabric, creating a material that was breathable, washable, and infinitely versatile. In ancient Mesopotamia, specifically around 4,000 years before the Common Era, wool became the primary engine of the economy. The Sumerians were master weavers, creating intricate garments called khaniks, which were tiered skirts made of tufted wool to mimic the look of sheepskin. Meanwhile, along the Nile, the ancient Egyptians perfected the use of linen, derived from the flax plant. Because of the intense heat, Egyptian clothing was designed for transparency and airflow. The higher your status, the finer and more translucent your linen became. This era also marked the birth of color as power. In the city of Tyre, around 1,500 years before the Common Era, the Phoenicians discovered how to extract a vibrant purple dye from sea snails. This, Tyrian purple, was so expensive and difficult to produce that it became the exclusive color of royalty and emperors for centuries. Clothing was no longer just about survival, it was a visual language. It told everyone exactly where you stood in the social hierarchy. But how did we go from these draped tunics to the complex suits and dresses we see later in history? As we will see in the next chapter, the Middle Ages brought a new obsession with the silhouette, leading to a period where laws were actually passed to stop people from dressing too well for their rank. By the Middle Ages, clothing had become so complex and symbolic that it required a new set of rules. Between the 11th and 15th centuries, Europe saw the rise of sumptuary laws. These were legal codes that dictated what colors, fabrics, and styles people could wear based on their social class. For example, in England during the year 1363, a law was passed strictly forbidding anyone below the rank of a knight from wearing expensive silks or furs. Clothing was the ID card of the medieval world. This period also introduced the concept of tailoring. Before this, most clothes were draped or tied. But now, with the refinement of buttons and laces, clothing began to follow the actual shape of the human body. The invention of the button, which became widespread in Europe around the 13th century, was a technological marvel. It allowed for garments to be tight-fitting, highlighting the waist and shoulders. This was the birth of fashion as we know it, a constant cycle of changing styles. As the Renaissance began, the world of clothing exploded with luxury. In cities like Florence and Venice, velvet, brocade, and gold thread became the markers of the wealthy elite. The printing press, invented in the 14th century, allowed for the first fashion plates to be distributed, spreading trends across borders faster than ever before. People were no longer just dressing for their local village, they were dressing for a global stage. But the biggest shift was yet to come. Up until this point, every single stitch, every yard of fabric, was made by human hands. In our final section, we will witness the moment when machines took over the needle, turning clothing from a handmade treasure into a mass-produced global industry, and we will ask, what does our future skin look like? The final and most dramatic transformation in the history of clothing began in the late 18th century with the Industrial Revolution. In 1764, James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny, a machine that could spin multiple spools of threads at once. Suddenly, fabric wasn't just for the rich, it was for everyone. The invention of the sewing machine in the mid-19th century by innovators like Elias Howe and Isaac Singer meant that a shirt that once took 14 hours to sew by hand could now be finished in less than 1 hour. This mass production changed our psychology. We moved from owning a few items for life to fast fashion. Today, we produce over 100 billion garments every single year. But as we look to the future, the definition of clothing is changing once again. We are moving beyond simple fabrics into the realm of smart textiles. Scientists are now developing fabrics that can monitor our heart rate, change color based on our mood, or even harvest energy from our movement to charge our devices. From the first bone needle in a Siberian cave to 3D printed garments made of recycled ocean plastic, our second skin has always been a reflection of our technological mastery. We started wearing clothes to survive the cold, but we ended up using them to define our humanity. As we move into an era of digital fashion and wearable technology, the question is no longer just, why do we wear clothes, but what can our clothes do for us? Thank you for joining us on this journey through time on Behind the Norm. From the evolution of lice to the high-tech looms of the future, we have seen that every thread tells a story. Next time you put on a simple t-shirt, remember, you are wearing 70,000 years of human genius. Don't forget to subscribe and explore the hidden stories behind the world we take for granted.